Snowball quilt blocks are squares that have a triangle in each corner. And today I'm going to share 3 tips to help you get perfect snowball blocks every time. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, embroidery, and embroidery. So a snowball quilt block is a really versatile quilt block. It is great to use with other blocks, and you can do this in all different sizes. One of the things I like to do with snowball blocks is use this as a frame to feature something else. So to feature like embroidery or applique or even some free motion quilting designs. It gives you a really nice blank space to work with. But it's also fun to use in combination with other quilt blocks. So I'm just going to show you basically how to do a snowball quilt block, but it's the same regardless of whatever size you're going to do. So you need to start off with a square of fabric, and I have squares that are 9.5 inches square. So that means my block is going to finish at 9 inches. So this square fabric is the size that you want your finished block to be. And then for each one of these corners, you're going to want a square of fabric. And I have 3.5 inch squares. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew these on. So if you wanted your triangle to be a 3.5 inch triangle on the small size, then a 3.5 inch square is what you would choose. So just the simple way is you're going to take the back of your 3.5 inch square, or whatever size square you have for the size block that you want to do. You're going to draw a line on the back from corner to corner. So once you have that line on, you're going to align it with the corner of your larger square, and you put them wrong sides together. And this is a time when I do sometimes use a pin just to hold that in place. So you've just aligned it right on the corner, and then you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to sew right on this line. So I've stitched right on that line, and we can see now when we fold it back, we're going to end up with our triangle. So just before we fold it back, I'm going to trim away the excess, leaving about 1/4 inch. But this seam allowance doesn't have to be exact because we've already done the sewing. So we're not aligning the seam allowance with anything. So now I'll just go to the ironing board and I will press that corner back. So that's what the corner looks like now that it's pressed back, and it should be still a right angle. It should fit. Your square should still be 9.5 inches square, but sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it's a little bit wonky. This doesn't quite fill out the corner like it's supposed to. So I have 3 little tricks. If you're having trouble getting your triangles to fill in the corner the way they're supposed to, then these 3 little tricks will help. The first trick is something that I already did, but I'm just going to go over it again. And that is to write the line right on the fabric. Now I know there are shortcuts you can use. I even sometimes use the shortcuts. If you put tape on your machine, you can use that as a line to follow. But if you're having trouble getting it, then you will want to draw the line right on the fabric. And make sure that you are going from corner to corner. And I like to draw from the middle of the shape out towards the corner, because sometimes if I start right in the corner, it might kind of pull it and it won't reach the corner exactly. It'll go a little bit wobbly. So I start in the middle, go out toward the corner, and then start in the middle and go out toward the other corner. So I have my line marked on, and I know it can be time consuming and a bit tedious, but If you're having trouble, mark your line on every piece. Then I will place this on the fabric and give it a little pin, and then my next tip is at the sewing machine. So when you're sewing, you want to stitch just on this side of the line and not far away from the line, certainly not 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, but just like a thread away from that line. And so that's what I mean. It's just a teeny tiny bit to the other side of the line. So by stitching on that side of the line, the side that's toward the corner, that gives us extra room in our fabric, because all the fabric and the thread and the fold over, that will take extra kind of material, and especially if your fabric is thick or your thread is thick, that will accommodate anything that's lost in the actual fold itself. So that's the second tip. So if you've tried both of those tips, you've marked your line, you've stitched just one side of the line, and you're still having trouble, your triangle is still coming out a bit small and not fitting, then you might want to do the next tip. And the next tip is use a larger square. So I still want to have a square with 3.5 inch sides, but instead of cutting a 3.5 inch square, I've cut a 4 inch square. So you can see this when I fold it in half, it should be bigger than what I need, and then I can just trim it down to turn this into the perfect 9.5 inch square. The one thing to be careful with is if you're using a larger square, you no longer want to mark this, because if I marked this and lined it up on here, then it's just going to be a bigger piece here. I'm not really solving the problem. So when I'm using a bigger square, I want to mark the back of my main block. So to mark this, I'm going to be marking a diagonal line that is 3.5 inches away on both of those sides. So I'm going to measure down one side, mark 3.5 inch, mark 3.5 inch down the other side, and then I will join those together. And so this now is going to be my sewing line. So now I can take this piece and I can eyeball that, but as long as these corners come up past this, then I know I'm going to have lots of room when I fold it back. So now I'll put a pin and I will go sew this. So now I sewed that right on the line that I've drawn. Now when I fold this back, I can see that when I press it, this is going to be bigger than what I need. And that's what I'm looking for, because then I can trim it down to be a perfect 9.5 inch. So here it's all pressed. Then I can just take my ruler and line up my ruler with this edge of the main block and this edge of the main block. And then I can just trim that down. So that last method is guaranteed to give you the perfect corner on your block. Now I would recommend try the other things first and try practicing a bit, because this one is the most fiddly and time consuming, but if you're looking for a perfect corner, then this method is going to give it to you. Now the last thing I have to say is not really a tip for snowball blocks, but it's a little bonus. And that is when you have your scraps that you've cut off, you can use those to make half square triangles. And if you stitch those while you're stitching the block, then you'll have a whole bunch of half square triangles ready to go. So the way you would do that is when you're marking your fabric, marking the diagonal line, you mark your first line corner to corner, just the same way you did before, but then draw another line 1/2 inch away from that line. And by drawing this line 1/2 inch away from the diagonal, then this will mean that all of your half square triangles are the same size. If you just cut your pieces off and then join them together, they're all gonna be kind of random sizes. There'll be little differences between them. But if you mark the sewing line before you start, then they will all be the same size. So now I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to pin it, I'm going to stitch along this line, but then I'm going to go back and stitch on the other line before I cut it. So this is what it looks like. I've stitched on both of those lines. So now I can just cut in between the lines, and you can use scissors or you can use a rotary cutter. It doesn't really matter. But I have my one triangle. It's going to be now part of my snowball block. And then my other set of triangles is a little half square triangle block. So this is nice to have for other projects, or you could use it in other blocks to go with your snowball blocks, whatever you want to do with this. Now, if having a whole bunch of half square triangles sitting around is stressful for you, if that's more of a problem, then you have my full permission to not make your bonus half square triangles. But it's a nice way to use up this fabric instead of just tossing all these little scraps. So if you don't want to use them, there may be somebody else that you could donate them to that would be happy to have them. But just think about this next time you're making snowball blocks. So you can use these tips for snowball blocks of any different sizes. And if you're looking for more quilt block tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, you can find all that at my website, epidastudio.com.